Well, hello, folks. This is Jeffrey Daugherty back with the Jeffrey Daugherty Show. I am the Christian whistleblower, and we're here again this week, finishing up our discussion about Apostle Paul Antichrist, my 410-page fact-based historical novel talking about how the Apostle Paul co-opted the message and movement of Jesus and created in its stead a guilt and fear-based control matrix which still rules us today. I encourage you to go back onto my YouTube channel. Just look under Jeffrey Daugherty, YouTube, you'll find it. And look and listen to all of these previous broadcasts about Apostle Paul Antichrist. Now, our website is currently down, undergoing some update and revision. We are without the melodious tones of my friend Cliff, who usually does our introduction and the outro, as we call it, on our radio show, but we should have him back in a jiffy. Miss his expertise very much. Do enjoy talking with him on a regular basis. One of the best in the business. And as we look today, last we saw Paul and Luke talking, Luke of course being the scribe for the so-called Apostle Paul. In one of their talks, it had become apparent to Luke that Paul had made the decision to eliminate the Apostle James. Now think of that. My assertion is that Paul made the decision to assassinate, if you will, the Apostle James, who had taken over the church leadership from Jesus after the crucifixion episode, which we're going to have to talk about in some deep detail before too long. And now here is Paul deciding he's going to kill James. And if you go back and listen to the other broadcast, you'll see the reason why he was going to kill James is because James had started a very effective offensive counterattack to Paul's co-opting the message of the Jesus movement. And again, the reason why we don't see this in the New Testament, well, there's a few reasons, but I think one of the biggest reasons is because, well, number one, we are taught not to believe it. It's never taught. It is a well-guarded secret, known only to, I'm convinced, a small cabal of leaders. And, actually, I believe a lot of these guys know it, but they don't allow themselves to know it because it's not profitable to know it. I believe Joel Osteen knows this, but it's not profitable for him to know it. At any rate, James had launched an offensive against Paul. It was really a counteroffensive. James, I'm sure, didn't want to go public with it, and he followed the rules that Jesus had established. He talked to Paul individually. He took some brethren and went to Paul. And then finally, after Paul refused both of those efforts, or those entreatments, if you will, it was only then that James decided to go public and began exposing the error that Paul was embracing and expounding. And you can contrast that with the way that Paul acted towards the apostles. He refused to go see them. He refused to talk to them. And he publicly rebuked Peter, the apostle. And then he also began to write publicly rebuking all the apostles and, of course, the Jesus movement as a whole. So James, with the book of James, which, and here was a long way around to the point I was beginning to make, the Old Testament as we have received it, Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, Acts, Romans, Corinthians, etc., that's not the way it was written. It is a jumbled mess. It is nowhere near its original chronological order. And I ask you, why would that be? We know more or less within a few years why or when each of those New Testament letters were written. You tell me why they were jumbled up and not presented in their chronological order. I'll wait. Email me at Jeffrey. No, that one's connected to the website, so it won't be working right now. Email me at Gotham, as in Batman, LTD, at gmail.com. Email me at nckabala at gmail.com. And you tell me a good reason why the New Testament is not presented in the chronological order in which it was written. You give me a good reason why it was jumbled, and intentionally so. And allow me to give you a good reason. The reason why the New Testament was not presented in order, the reason why it was not presented in the chronological order in which it was written, is because to read the New Testament in chronological order is to discover the fact that there was indeed a battle going on between the original apostles of the man we call Jesus Christ, who was really named Yahashua, but baby steps right now. We're not going to try to put too much on you that you won't be able to handle, but it was a battle between the original apostles of Jesus Christ and the so-called apostle Paul and his followers for the minds and hearts of the New Testament church. Jesus and the apostles had one doctrine and belief. Paul had another. And again, it's worth noting that almost 200 times Paul is referenced in Scripture. The only time that he's ever called an apostle is when he calls himself an apostle, with the possible exception, and I think the exception, of Revelation chapter 2, where he's called a false apostle. So put that in your peace pipe, as it were, and smoke it. So here we have the scene set with James about to be murdered by the so-called apostle Paul. Luke has found this out, and Luke goes to James and tries to beg and plead with him not to go to the feast. He tries to get James to not go because Luke tells him, Paul's going to try to kill you at the feast, because Paul had just told Luke as much. And of course, James, knowing that he had to fulfill all righteousness, knew that he was compelled, urged by the Spirit, that he had to go to the feast. And Luke tried as I can imagine, he tried another approach. Well, okay, go, but just don't speak. That way he thought maybe they could protect him. But again, James said, no, I've got to go. I've got to speak. And as Luke insisted, and I'm sure maybe even wept, that Paul was going to try to kill him, I believe that James was somehow settled in his spirit. And if it were to be that way, then it were to be that way. But Luke wasn't quite ready to give up. James was presented a plan by Luke, or Luke was presented a plan by James, or maybe they came to it together. But they decided, knowing that Paul was going to move aggressively against James, and that James probably wouldn't be the last one that he would move aggressively against, the scribe of Paul and the leader of the apostolic movement founded by Jesus Christ decided that they needed to work together. They decided Paul had to be stopped. They decided that they had to warn all the congregations. They just had to figure out a way to do it. Paul was not trying to just undermine the message. He was actually working against Judaism and against Jerusalem itself. When Luke informed James this, I'm sure it shocked him. And not only did they have to go against Paul, but they had to do it without raising suspicion. The Romans didn't want things riled up. The Romans didn't want their officials being talked bad about. So they needed to work something out to be able to go and warn the people about Paul without raising the hackles of Rome. Now, Luke had some ideas forming in his head. James had some ideas forming in his head. And Luke knew it was going to be a little bit of a difficulty, because Luke was about to propose a plan that would include essences. That's not the word I was looking for. That would include things. Boy, my vocabulary is fleeing me today. But it would include elements. That's the word. It would include elements of modern literature. It would include elements of the theater. It would include elements of Greek philosophy and rhetoric. All things that the Apostle James was woefully shy on understanding about. So the two of them sat together to work. The two of them sat together to figure out a way to combat Paul through the writings of the apostolic writers, being subtle as serpents subtle as doves, subtle as serpents, wise as doves, wise as serpents, gentle as doves. Again, it's a bad vocabulary day, but you are following me. I know you are. And when we get to the death of James, and we're probably not going to get too deeply into this today, that'll be for tomorrow's show. There's a single mysterious account in the New Testament, just one, that comprises the entire New Testament revelation of the death of James the Just, as he was called, the brother of the Lord and post-crucifixion leader of the original Jesus movement. It was left to the historians Clement and Josephus to go Paul Harvey on us and tell us the rest of the story. And that's what we're going to do, is tell you the rest of the story about the death of the Apostle James as we move forward here with the Jeffrey Daugherty Show, and I am the Christian Whistleblower. We're going to be starting a weekly program here before too long, hopefully before the end of the year. If not, maybe we'll kick it off with the new year. But it's going to be the WWJD program. That doesn't mean what you think it means. It'll mean weekly with Jeffrey Daugherty. And I think we're going to do it in a video format. Maybe not, but we're definitely going to do it in a live format. What I want to try to do is, I've been trying to get on the tour and get out there and start spreading the message from sea to shining sea, and doing meetings and doing book signings and talking in different places. And we're still going to plan to do that, but I wonder if I haven't been guilty of not doing anything because I'm waiting and saving and working to do a great thing. And there's nothing wrong with that, but sometimes, and I believe this, the wrong thing to do is nothing. So in the interim, between now and the time that we're able to put ourselves together financially, to have a RV, to have the means of sustaining myself financially as I divest of everything here in Orlando and get in that RV and take off for parts unknown, quite literally. Between now and then, we are going to start doing some things here on a local basis and throughout a day drive range, if you will, here in Florida. And being located in Orlando, I can just about go anywhere in Florida, and some even in South Georgia, and go for a day, speak, teach, and then come back that same day to Orlando. But what we want to start is with the WWJD show. We're going to have it recorded before a live audience. Maybe we'll have some question and answers from the audience, and we'll have it at a live venue here in Orlando. I have some places in mind, and maybe we'll do that on the road and some other places. So if you'd like to host a WWJD show, if you have a restaurant, a coffee shop, some type of a space where we could get a few people in there and have the show hosted there, and of course mention your place and give you some positive exposure here. Now, we do have a worldwide audience, and I don't know if people are going to come from Holland to your local store, but there are people listening all over the country and in virtually every city, so we're glad to have that. But we want to do that, and that's coming up. And tomorrow coming up, the shocking expose of the truth of the death of the Apostle James. If you want to ask me questions in the interim while we're reworking the site, Gotham, like in Batman, LTD @gmail.com or nckabbalah@gmail.com. And of course, you can always go to my YouTube channel and you can make comments there, and they are forwarded to me. And you can also go on my Facebook, which is Jeffrey Daugherty or Jeffrey Daugherty Show. So still plenty of ways to reach me. I look forward to your thoughts. I look forward to your comments, at least most of them. And until tomorrow, I am Jeffrey Daugherty, the Christian whistleblower, wishing you peace and light.